thinking about toys, right? And one of the most famous toy companies in the world is Fisher-Price. Most people think that toys are just for children, but retired employee Bruce Fox has taken toy collecting to a whole new level. A Fisher-Price employee for over 30 years, Bruce was the unofficial historian and the 75th anniversary spokesperson. He has written several books about Fisher-Price toys and has an extensive collection of the toys in his home. Hello, Mr. Fox. How are you? Let's go inside and take a look. Hi, Bruce. How are you
Nancy.
doing?
Welcome.
Good to see you.
You too.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Bruce Fox, who will share his amazing collection. Bruce, let's talk about the history of Fisher-Price.
I'd love to.
Okay, great.
So Herb Fisher was the president of All Fair Toys and Games in Churchville, New York. And he met a guy at a cocktail party. He was introduced by Elbert Hubbard II, the famous son of the famous Elbert Hubbard. They were introduced, and the Alderman Fairchild Company would not sell All Fair Toys and Games to Herm. So he wanted to start his own toy company, and Irving Price, the former senior vice president of F.W. Woolworth Company, said, you know what, I've got some money, I'm mayor of East Aurora, New York, and let's start our own toy company. So they did, and Fisher-Price was founded on September 1st, 1930, the company was incorporated.
Great.
Now, the first year, Fisher-Price went to Toy Fair, and they introduced 16 toys, and they called them the 16 Hopefuls. And here they are.
Why did they call them the 16 Hopefuls?
Well, they weren't sure how well they do, of course, because this was the Great Depression. Fisher-Price was founded during the Great Depression, which is amazing that the company survived. But they did, and they introduced 4 different play patterns, 4 toys in each play pattern. And that's why they called them the 16 Hopefuls, because they were hopeful that they really do well.
And I know that they're all made of wood. The early toys were all made of wood, made in America. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Fisher-Price used ponderosa pine, and they had a rail yard right into the corporate headquarters in Western New York, and they shipped it from the West, and ponderosa pine is all they used for decades and decades.
Excellent. Well, I see that you have some of the 16 Hopefuls here. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, here they all are. The rarest and the most desirable for collectors, because there's only a handful of these known, is Bunny Scoot. And this is Bunny Scoot on his little scooter. And the reason he's so rare is he only lasted for 1 year. Unfortunately, he must not have sold very well. So they only made him for 1 year, but of course collectors love that because there's a lot less of them. And this is one of the finest Bunny Scoots known as far as condition. They used oilcloth in their ears, which is no longer even available. And of course, everything was made out of wood. Every toy had to have action. And of course, Bunny Scoot had a lot of that.
Very good. What else would you like to show us from the 16 Hopefuls?
Well, I'll show you one thing that is really important. This is the Fisher-Price Creed. And the Fisher-Price Creed was the map of that Herm Fisher used to create every toy in the company. And this lasted for decades. But the 5 different principles of the Fisher-Price Creed were intrinsic play value, ingenuity, strong construction, good value for the money, and action. And speaking of action, the Fisher-Price Toys created the walkie-balkie backup toys in 1931. And this is the elephant. There's 4 different walkie-balkies. You had a key, and you wound up the key, and the toy will walk backwards and forwards on really entertain the kids. This is an actual walkie-balkie backup toy guarantee, which said the motor was guaranteed for life. This is the only one of these we've ever found. It's rice paper, so Fisher-Price even used quality in their warranty papers. This toy was famous. The New York Times in 1933 ran a front page article on this toy. It solved an international incident in Chile. The Chilean government had a nitrate plant, and the U.S., of course, the U.S. and the Chilean government use that plant. But the Chilean government was upset about some things, and they were going to cancel the contract. But William F. Culbertson, who was the ambassador to Chile at the time, brought this toy with him to the big meeting about the nitrate plant. And when everybody was angry and sitting around not knowing exactly what they were going to do, he pulled this toy out. He ran it across the table. Everybody started laughing, and everybody got together, and they solved the problem. And this toy, the walkie-talkie elephant, made the New York Times for that fantastic episode of Fisher-Price in 1933.
Wow, that's really quite a story. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the 16 hopefuls?
Well, I can just show you the 4 different play patterns we talked about. The first was a pop-up, and this is a very rare pop-up critter. Notice the banjo paddle, very large banjo paddle. Subsequent years, to save money, they came out with a guitar paddle, which was a lot smaller. But these banjo paddle toys were only made for the first year, and there's 4 different pop-ups. And then they made the Woodsy Wees, and the Woodsy Wees were toys that connected together. They were small, and they would create a little train they could hook together. And this is the Woodsy Wee Zoo box from 1931. And if you look up here, the Woodsy Wee Circus. These are the 11 different animals and clown that came in the Woodsy Wee Circus. Margaret Evans Price, who was the wife of Irving Price, was a nationally famous illustrator. She designed the first year toy line and the packaging. So the Woodsy Wee packaging, you see the whimsy and the cuteness of everything. That's because Margaret Evans Price designed it. There were also 4 pull toys in the line, led by Dr. Doodle. Dr. Doodle. This is a 1931 toy, never been played with except for me right now. And you could hear the bellows sound. Of course, he has the action, the clacking. This toy doesn't even have a logo on it yet. This was found in a warehouse in Pennsylvania after a flood of an old toy shop, and the toy store had closed, and 3 of these toys were found. We know it's very, very early because there's no logo on the toy at all, which was a really exciting find for me.
Absolutely. That's amazing.
Well, Dr. Doodle's wife, we'll call her, was Granny Doodle. And here's Granny. And Granny still has the rubber on the wheels which grip the carpet so the children could pull it and it would create its action. She still has a bow that's never been untied from her bonnet. So this is a 1931, very original toy, also no logo. So we had the pop-up critters, we had the Woodsy Wees, we had the pull toys, and we had the walkie-talkies. And that was the 16 hopefuls.
Tell us about working for the Fisher-Price Toy Company, Bruce.
Well, I was in retail in Houston, Texas in 1978. Wonderful 70 to 90 hour work weeks. But I loved Fisher-Price. I was in charge of the toy department among other parts of the store. I was an assistant store manager. And I always really promoted Fisher-Price. And so the Fisher-Price salesman really liked me. I was also in charge of the advertising for toys for the city for the Wilco department stores that I work for. So with that in mind, he said, you know what, we're expanding our company a lot. We need some new salesmen. So he came to me and he said, Bruce, we want you to interview for the Fisher-Price sales job in this area of Texas, Louisiana. And I said, you're kidding me. I don't know how I can be a salesman. I'm in retail. He said, Bruce, you can be a salesman. I said, okay. So I went through a series of interviews, actually about 6. It was a very exclusive job, which I didn't realize at the time. But Fisher-Price was the Cadillac of toy companies. And there was only about 20 salesmen in the entire country before they expanded with me and other salespeople that they hired. So it was a dream job. It was fabulous. I got out of retail prison, and I knew that about a week after I started my new job.
That's fantastic. And I know that Fisher-Price came to be one of the finest toy companies in the world.
Well, yeah, Fisher-Price is the largest preschool toy company in the world. As a matter of fact, the word preschool was coined by Herm Fisher's mother.
Oh.
Yes, Fisher-Price came out with some wooden blocks in 1934, and they had a whole series of blocks. You remember the blocks where you could build on different shapes and sizes, yeah, all made from ponderosa pine. Well, what Herm Fisher's mother saw those, and she said, Herm, you should call those preschool toys. So he called the blocks preschool, and then of course that led into the entire line, and now it's in the vernacular, preschool toys. Fisher-Price invented that.
That's incredible. That is so interesting. Thank you for that. Tell me about the first toy, the very first toy that you collected.
In 1980, I traveled to one of my accounts in New Orleans, and this was only about a year and a half into the job. And on the shelf, this was a wholesale company. So in a wholesale company, they would have one toy of each toys that they sold to the customers in a showroom. And I went into the showroom and I found Bouncy Racer still on the shelf in the showroom, and we hadn't been making that toy for 10 years. So obviously the guy before me wasn't doing his job very well, but what I did was tell the man that owned the company, I said, hey, you need to put a new fresh toy in this spot in your warehouse, in your showroom. So he said, okay, I will. And I said, well, what are you going to do with the Bouncy Racer? He said, well, how much is it? And I looked on the box and it said $1.20. It said it right on the box, $1.20, which is right there. And I said, okay. He said, give you $1.20 and it's yours. So that intrigued me so much because this toy is so cool. You can see it. This toy was from the 60s, 60 to 68, but it's wooden body and plastic wheels. But that really intrigued me, so that's really got me going. And that's when I started copying all the years and building the binder before I moved to Philadelphia. And that's when I really kind of got me going into the history of the company and the toys and how long they've been in existence.
Absolutely. When did they start incorporating the plastic with the wood? Was it 1960 or was it?
It was in the 60s.
In the 60s.
Fisher, well, actually, plastic. Fisher-Price was the first company to use plastic in the toy industry.
Oh.
In 1950, Queen Buzzy Bee, a cute little bee, her wings would spin when you pulled her. Those wings were the first use of plastic. Now, that plastic wasn't incorporated into many, many toys. It took over the years. But really, Fisher-Price stopped making wooden toys basically in the mid-60s. But the plastic started in the 50s, and of course it continued to today. Now plastic, of course, technically advanced itself from the original form of what it came in. But the first use of plastic, 1950, Queen Buzzy Bee's wings.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. I appreciate that. Bruce, what inspires you about Fisher-Price toys?
Well, I showed you the Creed, of course,
Yes.
the quality of the toys. Every time you walk into a buyer's office, they're anxious to hear what you have for sale. And it's nice to work for a company, not only you're proud of what you're selling, but you know the buyer really wants it. So that really, really helps. But I'll tell you a funny story. When I first started for the company, it was back in 1978. It was about 1979. I went to the Houston airport because I traveled all over Texas and Louisiana. And I went to the airport and I pulled my American Express card out and it said Bruce Fox Fisher-Price, and I was at the counter to buy a ticket. Well, over my shoulder, this very tall, good-looking guy said, "You work for Fisher-Price Toys?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir, I do." He said, "They're fantastic." Well, it turned out to be a Hollywood star. Now I can't remember his name, of course, but he was a well-known character actor in the movies, and you know who he was when you saw him. Anyway, that really inspired me. I said, "Wow, this guy knows Fisher-Price. He's a Hollywood star. I'm really proud of the company I work for." So that was really a lot of fun. And as time went by, you just realized you were working for a company that was special. Very special company with a very special product.
What is the most unusual Fisher-Price toy that you have?
I think it's Tumbling Tim. Tumbling Tim was a real scary looking Joker circus toy made in 1939, but he was only made for 1 year. He was pretty expensive, and I think that's why he didn't sell quite as well. But he was Toy of the Year. He was actually voted Toy of the Year in 1939. And here he is. I think moms saw their kids with that face and they were a little bit scared for the kid to play with it. But its action is unbelievable. Now this is 1939, and all you do is put him on the floor and he does the roll. Tumbling Tim.
That is pretty cool, but I've never seen a toy like that.
And you probably never will again. But this is a very valuable toy too,
I can
because
imagine.
it's circus, and it's also, of course, a push toy in Fisher-Price, so it's a multiple collectible. Circus collectors love it.
What is the rarest Fisher-Price toy that you have collected?
Well, there's several because of the 1 year situation, you know, when toys only made for 1 year. Bunny Scoot is one of them, but I'm going to tell you that it's probably Skipper Sam. And here's Skipper Sam. This is rare and it's really valuable because it's black memorabilia. This toy was made in 1934 for 1 year, and look at the action. Incredible.
That is
Fisher-Price toys ran on child power. They didn't need electricity back then, or batteries.
That is
So-
so awesome, and I'm thinking that to have a cultural diversity toy such as Skipper Sam, right, was very unusual for the time.
Well, sort of, except there was a trend back in the early 30s, you know, with the Our Gang show.
Oh, yes.
And in the, what was his name, Buckwheat,
Yeah.
who was such a character, and everybody loved Our Gang. Anyway, there was a trend, and in the toy industry, Fisher-Price always picks up on trends. So there was Skipper Sam, and there was several other toys. Pushcart Pete, which is extremely rare, was also one of the black memorabilia toys Fisher-Price made in the early 30s.
Would white people buy a black memorabilia toy?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
And of
That's
course,
good.
the collectors really love them now.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this toy was only for 1 year also, and I think that's because of it's very complicated and expensive at the time.
I see.
But it's really incredible action. Highly sought after. There's only a handful of these known. And this is one of the finest in its condition. It's hardly ever played with. The litho's perfect. The oars are perfect. The oars would break. Kids would get their hands on this, and you know, a lot of bad things could happen way back then. But this one is in really, really fine condition. It's got the original pull string, which is the way you always see if the toy's in original condition. If it's got the original pull string, that's very positive.
How have you acquired your Fisher-Price toy collection through the years?
Well, it's been really, really a lot of fun. And as time has gone on, you know how we've gone from magazines and newspapers and advertising in those to eBay. Things have really transformed. So back when I first started, there was a magazine called Antique Trader magazine, and it had ads in it from all over the country for all sorts of antiques. Well, one of the sections was toys. And so I looked in there and I saw people in Wisconsin, all over the country, and especially one guy in Wisconsin would always advertise Fisher-Price. Now, my wife and I were traveling also. We travel quite a bit, and we were in Pennsylvania, and I made friends with a lady who actually had gotten in touch with me and had found me a very rare early toy. Well, we went to her house, became friends with her, and she started being a picker for me. She'd go to Pennsylvania auctions, and she would find me toys that I wanted, and then I bought a lot of really nice early toys from her. And then as time went by, of course, eBay was created. Now, I had a really large collection, but one thing I would do too was upgrade my collection. So you might find a toy that you got from a collector and antique trader, but then it wasn't in mint condition. So I wanted that toy in mint condition. So then I'd go out, find the same toy again in better condition, and I'd sell the one that I had before it, and then I'd upgrade my collection that way. But then eBay came along. eBay actually helped me find some of the earliest rare toys that I didn't have. Because eBay, of course, was from collectors all over the country, and there's no telling what you can find on eBay. So that really helped me kind of finalize my collection. So I've got everything I really want to find right now, except for about maybe 4 or 5 toys.
What is a toy that you're particularly proud of collecting?
Well, there's 2 of them. And the first one is Tricky Tommy. Tricky Tommy was made just for 1 year in 1933. He's a little cat. He's a push toy. This toy was soot covered in black.
Ooh.
And I saw him advertised. It was in an auction, but no one wanted to buy it because they thought you couldn't possibly fix it. Well, I know how to fix the toys and how to clean them up. So I got this guy, and my wife saw it when I bought it. She said, "Why did you buy that?" Well, then I did my little magic cleanup job, and you can see how beautiful the toy is now. It's almost mint. So I was pretty proud of myself too, because I got this for a fraction of what it would have cost if it had been in this condition that it's really in.
Well, that's wonderful. What else do you have for us?
The second toy that I'm even more proud of is Pushcart Pete. Pushcart Pete is a Bellman. It's a black memorabilia toy. But this toy is in mint condition. It's considered one of the rarest toys that Fisher-Price ever made. It was only made for 1 year, 1934. And this toy, when it was in an auction, it had white flecks all over when they took the photo of it, it had white flecks on it as if it had gotten paint on it.
Ooh.
And nobody wanted to bid on it to what it was really worth because of that. Well, I went ahead and stepped out there and bid quite a bit, but I mean, this toy sold for probably 4 or 5 times what I paid for it at one point. But the reason when I got it, I was all worried that I was going to have to clean some paint off of it. When I got it, it was in mint condition. They had taken a photo with glare in it that made it look like paint, but there wasn't paint on the toy. So I really kind of had a winner with this
You
one.
made out with it.
I made out
yes.
big time. This was a neat find.
Yes. And so what did he do? You said he had action.
Well, he's a bellman.
Oh,
So
I
you see him pushing his cart? He just goes crazy pushing his big old heavy cart.
Oh, gosh.
And he's a bellman from the early 30s. Black memorabilia.
Bruce, which toy means the most to you and why?
Well, the toy that means the most to me, and it's a one-year toy, really rare toy, is Bunny Scoot. And I talked about Bunny Scoot earlier being in the first-year toy line. This is one of the 16 hopefuls. To me, this is the Ark of the Covenant for Fisher-Price because very few of these are known, and this is the finest example. But this toy, I always wanted the toy. I didn't have it in my collection for many years, 20, 25 years.
Ooh.
And finally, a person that knew that I collected found this. A 99-year-old woman had passed away, and they found this in her attic during the estate. This was in Pennsylvania. And so he called me and told me he found it. And of course, the price was steep, but that's okay. And so I paid for this toy, probably more than I'd ever paid for a toy at the time. This was back in the early 90s. But this actually was probably mid-90s, excuse me. But this toy is I'm so proud of because it was a first-year toy, extremely rare, and it's the finest known in its condition.
So Bruce, was Fisher-Price always a profitable company?
No, it wasn't. In 1931, during the Great Depression, Fisher-Price was created. And they had enough money with their investors to last the first 5 years. And they were running out of money. But in 1936, they came up with a Disney toy, Disney being an extremely popular new licensed product. But they came up with a Disney toy called Pluto the Pop-Up Critter. Now you remember the pop-ups from 1931. They were larger, they had the big banjo paddle. This is a smaller toy. But this toy, being less expensive to make and having the Disney character on it, was a home run. So much so that they made $250,000 in profit in 1936 just because of this toy. It was so popular, they had to have Goodwill Industries make them in their homes. They had a special kit that Fisher-Price produced. They gave the kit to the people in Goodwill working out of their houses, and they made these so they could even sell them on street corners for 10 cents a piece. That's how popular they were. A lot of 10 cents made up $250,000 in profit. But that happened, and it created the largest preschool toy company in the world for the next many decades.
That's astounding. And I'm very impressed with the sophistication of the toy, and hard to believe that they sold for 10 cents at the time.
It is. But all these little pieces on the legs and the tail were all individual pieces. They all were in the kit, and they had an instruction sheet on how to put them together.
Oh, that's great. Next, let's talk about the books that you've written about the Fisher-Price Toy Company.
Well, there's 3 books. The first one, of course, being the most important. And what happened was, I gave a speech to the company in 1985. The vice president said, "Bruce, you've got all these toys, I understand, your collection. We have the Fisher-Price Silver Dollar Club banquet," and that was for 20-year employees to be in the Silver Dollar Club, which is another great story, Herm Fisher and their silver dollars. But anyway, so they wanted me to give a speech to these people at the the Erie County Community College. So I put together slides of my collection. I stood up there nervous as I could be, and I gave the talk on the toys, which I kind of created eras of the company and showed the toys in chronological order. And when I was done, there was silence, and all of a sudden the entire room erupted in laughter, and everybody stood up and went crazy. And I said, "You know, I got something here." So the company, the vice president talked to me again. He said, "Let's write a book on the history." So I gave a couple other talks, and then we decided to write the first book. So the company gave me kind of a 1-year opportunity to write the book, and they owned a school that was no longer a real school in East Aurora. And we set up, and that's where we had our photo studio for all our toys, a real photo studio. And they set up a room next to it so we could shoot the toys in the photo studio. And I was setting up in the room. This is a picture of me selling. I still had to do my job and sell toys to my customers. So this is a picture of me selling toys to my customers, but the old toys are in the briefcase as I'm writing the book on the history.
And I see that is some of the toys that you described, like this little guy here,
Yeah, the coaster boy.
Coaster Boy.
So they put the old toys in the briefcase just as a kind of a nod to the history.
Yes.
So here's my first book. By the way, my co-author John Murray was, of course, a very big part of all this. John was he was in charge of the patina, the paint for all the toys at the company, and he was a collector. So he and I got together, and John did the technical side of the book, but I did a lot of the details. There's different sections of the book. We have different eras. Each toy line in the book is, the first part of the book was the history. And here's the entire history of the company. Now this book was only from 1931 to 1963. And that's because in 1963, it was 25 years earlier. This was in 1987 that we came out with a book. And all collectibles have to be 25 years old. So what we did was print the book in 87, not going past 1963 for the toys. So this toy shows the history, and then of course we started in 1931 with the 1931 toy line. And each year we use the company photography. You can see the incredible photography in this book. 1931 toy line all the way through 63. And then we have a section in the back which details every toy that was made, every year, how many years it was made, all the way from 31 to 63.
That's an incredible book, really. Worth your time, I'm sure.
So that evolved in 2000, the year 2000. We wanted to do another book. So my wife, who was a big part of this, John still helped me on it, but my wife and I really spent a lot of time. We actually used our home, set up a photo studio in our basement, and we did using a first generation digital camera. We did this new book. We wrote the history all the way to 2000, and the publisher wanted to do this book, so we did it. And we did digital photos of each toy line with pretty much the entire year in one or two photos instead of individual shots like the first book. This book has a lot more to it. It's got some great sections. You can see the inside cover with all the little people. What's really fun, we have toy stories in here, how we collected some of our really rare toys called Toy Stories. And then the back of the book has, as you can see, much more detail in how many years each of the toy was made, and of course a lot more years were involved. So that's the book that was first printed in 1987. I just blew it. This is the book that was first printed in the year 2000.
What is the most satisfying aspect of collecting your Fisher-Price toys?
Well, in addition to wanting to have the most most complete vintage Fisher-Price toy collection in excellent condition, which I've worked on for 40 years, I also wanted to be the company historian after writing the books. I really wanted the company to know that history. So I created a slideshow with music, which evolved into a much more complex presentation. But I gave it probably 24 times. I gave it to the employees at the factories. I gave it to historical societies. And in 2005, I was the company spokesperson for our 75th anniversary. That was really important to me. So I gave a speech to the entire company, all 1,100 people, in the East Aurora Auditorium, and it was broadcast in New York from East Aurora. And I really spent a lot of time creating a talk about the company. It really was a lot of fun. So that evolved into me being the spokesperson on 17 Good Morning shows. They set me up in the museum we have on the company property. And I did 17 Good Morning shows from the East Coast to the West Coast with a satellite truck, but that was really fulfilling. I mean, plus I think it helped me keep my job for quite a few years, even though I did my job. It was nice to know that they wanted my input at sales meetings. They ask questions about the history, to have prizes and things. Always come to me for the answers. So it was really a fulfilling job. I couldn't ask for a better career.
So Bruce, why do you collect Fisher-Price toys?
It's an addiction. Any true collector knows they have to keep finding that next toy, whatever they collect. I even joined the Antique Toy Collectors of America, which is a huge club with people that have very important large toy collections. And I've been a member of that club for the last 12 years, which has been very satisfying. But what's funny about collecting toys and Fisher-Price is once I got so many of the toys, I said, well, what else did Fisher-Price do? And Margaret Evans Price was a nationally famous illustrator of children's toys. She helped design the first toy line, and this is just one of the books that she did for children, which is one of my favorites. We always put it out at Christmas. But the fact that she was such a fabulous illustrator, I collect all of her postcards and all of her books, and I collect all fair toys, which are right behind us here on the shelf, and that was Herm Fisher's first company that he couldn't buy, which I told you about earlier. Yeah. So once you start collecting, you never stop.
Are there any toys you have yet to collect to complete your collection?
Well, I get a toy every year or two that I don't have, and now it's all come down to 5 toys that I don't have.
Wow.
And they're all Easter toys from 1936 And they didn't make a lot of them back then because that was the first year that Fisher-Price came out with Easter toys. You know, Fisher-Price was innovative in many ways in the toy industry. And one of them was creating Easter toys back in the 30s because they wanted to help the retailers sell toys year-round, not just at Christmas. So Easter toys were a big deal, but they didn't make a lot of them. So I have all but about 5 Easter toys in my collection. They're extremely rare, obviously, or I would have them.
Bruce, we've talked about the Fisher-Price toys that you have in your collection. What about the toys, the new toys that you have that continue Fisher-Price's legacy?
We've talked about all the toys from 1931 to 1963. 63 is when my first book ended, and that's when, basically, when wooden toys stopped at Fisher-Price. But right before 1963, in 1959, the designers at Fisher-Price came out with a toy called the Safety School Bus. Now, in 1950, there was the Looky fire truck. It had little firemen attached to the back of the fire truck. Well, a brilliant designer in 1959 said, hey, why don't we take these little people out of that fire truck, let's put them in a school bus, which is one of the most popular themes for kids, and let's call them Little People. So what they did was create the 1959 Fisher-Price school bus. And this is the guy right here that really started the craze of Little People. There's Butch, the mean boy on the bus. And in 1959, that's like I said, they created the first school bus. But if you'll see here on the shelf, there's 3 more school buses in 60, 61, and 62. And these are all wooden little people in different toys over the years. There are 2 billion Little People in existence that Fisher-Price has made. Little People today, in the year 2022, is still a big part of Fisher-Price's business. Now, one of the rarest Little People toys is right here below me. This is the Fisher-Price Amusement Park. Mint in the box, extremely rare to even find this. But this was made in 1963. It's one of the largest Little People toys because there's a mat in it, and you lay the mat down and it creates the amusement park, and then you place all the toys in the various places on the mat where they belong. And like I say, this is a highly sought after, really rare toy, and that's why I have it here on display in the toy room.
What are your plans for the future?
Finding a home for all of this. And that's not going to be easy because I don't want to auction the collection off in pieces. I want to give the collection, hopefully, to Fisher-Price Company itself, if not to a major museum. And unfortunately, my kids are not interested in having all the toys. None of them want a house full of toys. So we're going to find a place. I have a friend, for instance, that has a huge toy collection. He might purchase it from me. But then, of course, what happens to his is 10 times bigger than mine, if you can believe it. But anyway, so the whole plan is to find a home for the collection.
Why wouldn't Fisher-Price want this? It's such a treasure.
Fisher-Price might want it. They have a lot of the toys, of course, themselves. They have their own museum.
Oh, I see.
But my collection is more thorough and more detailed. I even have all the ephemera, all the original catalogs. I have original letters from Herm Fisher to the trade. A lot of things like that I don't think they've kept over time. So I think, if I could sell it to them verbally and literally, I think it'd be to their advantage to have it. But that's something down the road.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I would. Toy collecting is really fun. And there's a lot of people out there with toy collections. As a matter of fact, the finest toy collections are in the Antique Toy Collectors of America, the ATCA. And the ATCA, you can find it online at atca-club.org. But it's a club full of about 300 of the most famous toy collections around the world, even though it's Antique Toy Collectors of America. There's members in Germany and England and all over the various countries all over the world. So it's a fabulous club. If you're interested in collecting toys after seeing all of this, collecting more toys that you already have or starting your collection, you should really get in touch with that toy club because it's the collections, the finest toys collections in the world.
That was an amazing journey, Bruce, and I know we certainly have increased our appreciation of the wonders of the Fisher-Price toys. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome, and happy hunting.
Be sure to watch Bella Vista and Beyond every second Wednesday of the month. Just go to Bella Vista Community TV and click on the show that you want to see and the date. You can watch it anytime, doesn't have to be today. So go ahead and look for the show after 3 o'clock today. Don't forget, we're all volunteers here at BBC TV, and we have our bills to pay. Text the word donate to 479-269-9426 to keep the cameras rolling. That will take you directly to the donation page. Or you can send a check to BBC TV, 1801 Forest Hills Boulevard, Suite 203, Bella Vista, Arkansas, 72715. Be sure to include your name, address, email, and phone number so we can thank you. We appreciate the generous support of the City of Bella Vista and the Property Owners Association. We couldn't keep the cameras rolling without you. Thanks to Becky Parmalee of Homestead Creations and Lisa Marutka of Three Wishers Travel, our silver supporters. For Bella Vista and Beyond and the fabulous Bruce and Becky Fox, I'm Nancty Noyes. See you in January.